Hi, I'm Dong Sean. Welcome to Digging into China, where we explore China in depth to review unique perspectives. Today, we are diving into the question of how long China's economic crisis might persist. As the saying goes, history offers lessons for the future. But China's current situation is nearly unprecedented, with no existing economic model fully capturing its complexities. When it comes to the collapse of asset bubbles, China bears a striking resemblance to Japan's experience in the past. In terms of the Communist Party's fiscal pressure, declining government efficiency, and eroding public trust, the parallels are strong with the Soviet Union in its final days. Meanwhile, the issue of overcapacity echoes the United States during the Great Depression of 1929. Given that standard economic models struggle to provide a comprehensive explanation of China's circumstances, we'll adopt a comparative approach. By examining the similarities and the differences between China's economic crisis and those of other nations, we can construct a logically coherent model to better understand the situation. Let's begin by comparing the collapse of China's real estate bubble with Japan's. In terms of debt levels, when Japan's real estate market crashed in 1991, Japanese households were in robust financial health with strong savings. This cushioned the fiscal impact of the asset bubble's collapse, preventing an immediate crisis. According to the OECD Economic Survey's Japan 1991 report, Japan's central government debt in 1990 was approximately 38% of gross national product (GNP), rising to 45% when including off-budget obligations such as those tied to Japan National Railways, comparable to the liabilities of China's state-owned enterprises. Japanese household debt, however, remained notably low. The same report highlights that the Japanese household's net financial assets as a share of GNP grew significantly from 50.5% in 1980 to 92.8% by 1989, after accounting for liabilities. A large portion of these assets was held in savings and low-risk government bonds, reflecting a cautious approach to debt, exceptionally cautious, even by conservative standards. By contrast, U.S. household debt during the same period ranged from 35% to 45%, while Japan's household debt stayed below 20%. Even so, Japan faced deflation after its asset price collapsed due to a credit contraction, with the debt-to-disposable income ratio at just 30%. China, however, starts from a far more precarious position. Official data pegs its debt-to-disposable income ratio at 133%, a figure that dwarfs Japan's. What about China's household debt today? According to 2023 IMF data, it stood at 63.7%, climbing to 66% now. That year marked both the end of China's stringent COVID lockdowns and the overt collapse of its asset bubble, making it comparable to Japan's 1991 crash. Yet, China's household asset structure is heavily distorted due to limited investment options, with 80% of household wealth tied to real estate, close to Japan's 65% in property and land. However, the ability to repay debt reveals a vast disparity. Chinese household income constitutes less than 1/3 of GDP, while Japan's reached 2/3, even with a robust social safety net. Still, Japan fell into a deflationary spiral. Japan's so-called lost 20 or 30 years weren't primarily due to households being overwhelmed by the bubble's collapse, which crippled consumption and investment. Rather, it stemmed from worsening economic expectations, prompting people to tighten their belts voluntarily. China's deflation, however, is different. It's not a lack of desire to spend, but the real estate bubble's collapse, obliterating consumption capacity amid low social safety nets, limited disposable income, and high debt. Japan's government mitigated this by shifting household leverage to the public sector, with the Bank of Japan lowering long-term interest rates even to negative levels, effectively subsidizing household balance sheet as the lender of last resort. Japan's strategy of suppressing long-term interest rates shifted costs over time by discounting household liabilities, reducing their actual debt. Meanwhile, the Bank of Japan's bond duration structure lengthened, meaning its investment portfolio took losses. This dynamics is evident in the balance sheet of households and the central bank. Household debt's net present value decreased significantly, while the Bank of Japan absorbed the temporal costs, reflected in its rising portfolio duration. Japan's household balance sheet, burdened by bubble-era debt, saw their liabilities devalue while the government's fiscal deficit and the central bank's debt-to-asset ratio grew. In contrast, the Chinese Communist Party has restricted declines in long-term interest rates, particularly for 10-year government bonds, and limited capital flows during a crisis of confidence. Local governments have resorted to aggressive tactics, such as cross-regional fines known as overseas fishing. The result is a simultaneous deterioration across the private sector, households, and government finances, a self-inflicted wound of wanting everything and achieving nothing. Worse still, while Japan faced a gradual generational population decline, China's is a cliff-edge drop, exacerbated by the one-child policy and the modern youth's reluctance to marry or have children. Any one of these issues would challenge any government, but in China, the Communist Party's missteps are converging simultaneously, a situation beyond mere description. Under the Communist Party and Xi Jinping's leadership, China's balance sheet problem isn't about the repair, but about indebted population being naturally phased out, or, as the saying goes, debts die with the debtor. Rather than framing China's exit from this debt deflation spiral as a financial issue, it's a demographic one tied to population age and life expectancy. The party claims China's average life expectancy is 74 years. Fine, let's accept that. The post-80s and the post-90s generations, the main bearers of real estate debt, suggest a 40-year timeline for generational replacement. But what will cost-benefit transfers look like under the party's governance? Generational turnover will increase non-performing loan rates in Chinese banks and balloon government debt. The Communist Party, unlikely to absorb these costs, will probably shift them to younger generations, post-2000s, post-2010s, and even post-2020s, through measures like higher taxes, reduced welfare, and steep social security contributions. Thus, 40 years marks only the timeline for balance sheet turnover, not economic recovery. Given the party's path-dependent behavior, beyond burdening younger generations, their options are limited. Mass money printing already underway acts as a seigniorage tax, passing costs to households. China's economic issue isn't merely an exhausted model, but a political system, and the Communist Party's rule reaching its end. On government efficiency and credibility, parallels with the Soviet Union's final days are evident. The Communist Party's strategies draw from the Soviet collapse, where Gorbachev reforms resembling China's late 1980s price dual-track system and a partial political loosening, aimed to boost economic vitality and attract Western investment. These failed, exposing the Soviet regime's irredeemable state. The Communist Party under Xi Jinping takes the opposite tack, citing the Soviet collapse as a lesson that no man stood up. They view Gorbachev's path as no cure for communist states, but assume the opposite is. Yet, reality isn't a binary of hardline versus compromise. This aligns with Xi's linear thinking. But the real-world problems are complex, involving diverse interests, stakeholders, and execution challenges. Xi's binary framework, where if A fails, negative A must succeed, is flawed and likely more destructive. The Soviet model left a framework for Russia's partial revival under Putin, but the Xi's approach risks ensuring the Communist Party's complete collapse. Economically, the party further weakens the private sector, offering empty promise on issues like overseas fishing. This affects livelihood, as the private sector drives 80% of China's employment, a core issue. High unemployment erodes disposable income and debt repayment capacity. Even shifting costs to younger generations requires their full employment and value creation. But official youth unemployment is 20%, with non-profit estimates at 40%. Cost shifting fails, hastening the party's demise. Its linear approach ensures outcomes opposite to its goals. The harder it pushes, the faster it unravels. Xi's persistent with this linear mindset guarantees the party's swift end. On overcapacity, China relies on exports, contingent on international diplomacy. Recently, Foreign Minister Wang Yi's claim in Europe that Russia must not lose the Russia-Ukraine war as China can't bear the cost likely stunned EU officials, especially as China seeks non-American markets to absorb excess capacity. In conclusion, China's debt problem from a balance sheet perspective is intractable, not a matter of 30, 40, or even 80 years. As it's not purely economic, recovery becomes analyzable only when the Communist Party fails, marking the point when solutions become calculable. Thank you so much for watching. If you find this video helpful, please like it, drop a comment below, and hit the subscribe button right here. It really helps YouTube suggest my video to others. I'll be back with more content soon. Until then, be well.